Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters here on France 24. Coming up on today's show, Syrian anger at what it says were Israeli airstrikes this week. Damascus accuses its neighbour of an act of aggression and calls on the United Nations to impose sanctions. We'll be getting a glimpse of life in Egypt's North Sinai region, an area barred to journalists and at the heart of the Egyptian government's battle with Islamists. Plans for a buffer zone around Rafah have been announced. We'll also be catching Iraq's last train. The Baghdad to Basra still runs, a reminder of more peaceful and hopeful days. First, though, to the airstrikes that Syria has accused Israel of carrying out this week. Damascus says there were two, including one against Syria's main international airport. There's been no confirmation from Israel, but it wouldn't be the first time that the country had carried out such strikes since the start of Syria's civil war. Israel's always made plain its red lines, among them moves by Hezbollah to acquire sophisticated weapons from allies like Syria.
Rockets falling in the direction of a Damascus suburb, caught on amateur video on Sunday. The Syrian army says they were fired by Israeli warplanes. Syrian state television calls it a show of aggression on those opposing the government.
The Israeli enemy has struck an aggressive attack on Syria, targeting two peaceful areas in a suburb of Damascus, in Dimas and near Damascus International Civilian Airport. There's been no loss of human life.
The Israeli Defense Forces have carried out several previous attacks in Syria since the start of the civil war in 2011. For some analysts, Sunday's is just the latest.
They seem to be based on a concern that there is concerted effort in order to supply the Lebanese movement Hezbollah with sophisticated weapons, and Israeli politicians have said on many occasions that they will not allow this to happen. So we can assume that they are part of a concerted effort by Israel to send a message that such shipments will not be tolerated.
These shipments are presumed to be heading from Iran through Damascus and destined for Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel's priority is to make sure the Shia militant group doesn't benefit from the weapons its ally Iran is sending. Israel has refused to confirm or deny this latest attack, but earlier the same day, the Israeli Prime Minister pledged to continue to deal with regional threats. In his weekly cabinet meeting, Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel was closely monitoring the Middle East, something a UN report published last week appears to confirm. It says it saw members of the Israeli army talking with Syrian rebels at the border. This dialogue may have been taking place for the last 18 months. That's according to a UN force stationed in the Golan Heights. Reports that wounded Syrian opposition fighters have been treated in Israeli hospitals have been taken as proof. Proof, certainly, that the fragmentation of Syria's conflict leaves Israel in an even more delicate position than usual.
Well, meanwhile, inside Israel, environmentalists are racing against the clock, trying to clean up one of the worst environmental accidents in the country's history. The multi-million-litre oil spill in the Areva Desert in the south of Israel was caused by an accidental strike to the Trans-Israel pipeline, this during maintenance work. It's feared that with rains due, the spill could contaminate the Red Sea 20 kilometres away. To Egypt now, and the North Sinai region in particular, currently one of the most dangerous in the world. Ever since the military ouster of Mohamed Morsi back in 2013, insurgent groups in the region have been stepping up their campaign of violence against security forces. The Egyptian army has in turn been cracking down. Plans to turn Rafah on the border with the Gaza Strip into a buffer zone have been announced. Amnesty International has already condemned arbitrary demolitions and forced evictions. It's almost impossible for journalists to report from the Sinai since the army's barred the media from entry. But our correspondents now provide a rare glimpse into the situation there, thanks to rare images and interviews from the region.
Hundreds of houses destroyed. A stretch of land 13.5 kilometers long transformed to ruins. This is what the Egyptian town of Rafah along the border with Gaza looks like now. During the first wave of demolitions at the end of October, more than 1,000 families were given just 48 hours to evacuate their homes. A shock for this father of 8. He's lived in the same house for the past 75 years.
Are you going to El Arish?
I don't know. Only God knows.
Many of the displaced have taken refuge in the neighboring city of El Arish. Meanwhile, the streets of Rafah have been transformed into an open-air furniture warehouse. Egypt is creating a buffer zone along its border with the Gaza Strip. It will include a water-filled trench that aims to choke a growing jihadist insurgency. For over a year, Islamists based in Sinai have stepped up attacks against security forces. Egyptian authorities accuse Hamas militants of taking part. With this buffer zone, the army aims to eradicate the tunnels between Egypt and Gaza that have been used to smuggle weapons and militants. On the desert outskirts of Cairo, we meet a young Bedouin who's worked for years as a smuggler in the tunnels. He confirms that some Palestinian militants are operating alongside insurgents in Sinai.
There
is a link between Hamas and the jihadists in Sinai. Originally, Hamas didn't come to fight the Egyptian army. They came to launch operations against Israel from the Sinai because their territory is under siege. But who was there waiting for them? The Egyptian army.
According to the former smuggler, more and more Bedouins could turn against the Egyptian army. Many of them say they've been unjustly equated with terrorists.
If you're walking in the street and a sniper suspects you're a terrorist, he'll open fire. They're turning people into terrorists here. People whose cousins or brothers are killed are going to want revenge. So where you had just a couple of terrorists before, now you have many.
The residents of the peninsula feel trapped between militants and the army. Many of them want to quit the region, as Abu Assi did, thanks to his smuggling revenues. But they have nowhere to go.
Baghdad has called for an escalation in the fight against the Islamic State group. The Iraqi Prime Minister took the opportunity this week of a visit by the American Defense Secretary to ask the United States to step up its efforts against the jihadists. Haider al-Abadi told Chuck Hagel that the Islamic State group was on the descent and that its capabilities had been substantially weakened. For now, though, the jihadists remain in control of vast swathes of Iraq, parts of the country that are now almost entirely inaccessible. Indeed, much of Iraq's rail network has simply ceased to function. Its foundations were laid by the British with the aim of unifying the country. Today, only one line remains open, running from Baghdad to Basra, a symbol of Iraq's current disunity. This report from our correspondents Miyuki Droz and Julien Fouché.
Despite the chaos in many parts of Iraq, every evening at 7 p.m. sharp, the train for Basra leaves from Baghdad Central Station. It's a 12-hour trip southbound, and the man in charge here is Farouk.
Wait a minute, I have to be careful.
The journey begins amid the heavy traffic of Baghdad's southern neighborhoods. This is one of the only secured routes in and out of the Iraqi capital, but it remains a dangerous place. Baghdad is almost surrounded by jihadists.
We're entering a risky area. We trust God to protect us. There's an engine running half an hour ahead of us to ensure there's no risk for the travellers.
For 10 years, Farouk had been driving trains across Iraq, but for the last 3 months there is only one route where he can work, Baghdad-Basra. Meanwhile, in the capital's central station, it's hard to imagine that under this roof 1,200 people would pass every single day. But that was before the war. Now, Ali Hassan is the manager of a ghost town.
This is the ticket office to Mosul, but it's over now.
Most counters have been shut. Many destinations on display are now under control of the Islamic State organization.
It depresses me to look at all this. It doesn't look like a station anymore. It's as if it were a garage to store wagons.
The Iraqi government still portrays this station as a symbol of a country which could live in peace and unity. But nowadays, most travelers are Shiites, like Nabil, a young militiaman who is on leave and is heading back home.
For fighters like us, taking the train is much safer than driving. On the road, anything can happen, any kind of incident, especially with the jihadis.
Thousands of men like Nabil have taken up arms against the Sunni jihadists. Before boarding the train this summer so he could reach Baghdad and take part in the fighting, Nabil worked as an educator in a kindergarten.
This here was in Fallujah.
The 26-year-old joined the Shiite militia with his older brother, here to the right of this picture.
He was shot in the head by a sniper. I'm really proud of my brother. He participated in the battle, and he's now a martyr.
Yes, he was defending his country and our holy places.
Backed by the authorities, Shiite militias were recently accused of war crimes by Amnesty International. IS group's territorial gains have seen Iraq reverting to the old demons of inter-religious violence. From his counter, Ali is a keen observer of what he calls a lost generation.
All these young men have been living through violence. The only thing they know is war and fighting. It's going to be very difficult for them to go back to normal lives.
The waiter is nostalgic of a time long gone, under Saddam Hussein's dictatorship, when he would serve more than just soft drinks.
People were more open-minded then. In the train, we used to serve alcohol, beer.
At dawn, the train makes its way through the Basra desert and its refineries, Iraq's largest oil fields. In rich but divided Iraq, some today say the country should split into 3 states, Kurdish, Shiite and Sunni, a radical solution that could appeal to young fighters like Nabil.
In the south, we're all brothers. There's no terrorism, no Sunnis.
With his comrades, Nabil will board the same train in 2 weeks to return to the front, while Ali, the nostalgic bartender, will head back tonight to Baghdad, the capital of a country in tatters.
That brings us to the end of this week's edition of Middle East Matters. You can catch up with previous episodes on our website at www.france24.com. We'll be back again next week, though, for a look at the latest news in the region. Goodbye for now.